Welcome to LHAG's mini podcast where we bring you bite-sized information in 5 minutes. Today's episode is focused on diagnosis. When we visit the doctor, there is an expectation that a correct diagnosis will be delivered. I'm certain many have felt anxiety just going into a consultation because I know I do. But some come out of consultations feeling like perhaps the diagnosis just wasn't quite right. Well, what do you do about it then? Well, we must understand that the area of diagnosis is tricky because there are various factors at play. You see, doctors are essentially playing detective based on clues and information you provide in making a diagnosis. So it's not uncommon for there to be errors, and it is possible for a diagnosis to be missed, delayed, or even wrong. That said, it should be noted that diagnostic errors does not in itself amount to negligence if, and I stress it here, the doctor had observed the required standard of care expected of him. So at this juncture, you might wonder, when is diagnostic error deemed negligent then? Well, it's negligent where it can be established or even demonstrated that the doctors failed to carry out examinations or tests that the patient's symptom called for, or the doctor's conclusion with regards to the diagnosis was one that no reasonable, competent doctor would have ever arrived at. You see, the rationale behind this principle is that in the realm of diagnosis and treatment, there is ample scope for genuine differences of opinion, and that one man is clearly not negligent merely because his conclusion differs from that of another professional. So let me give you an example. There is a case which is reported in our law journals where a patient was initially managed on a provisional diagnosis of a stroke, when in reality he was suffering from another condition. In this case, the doctors were not liable as the latter condition was a very rare type of infection, and at all material times the patient was actually presenting signs and symptoms consistent with a stroke. So, court actually remarked that it was unreasonable for a doctor to first suspect a rare condition when the symptoms and signs presented by the patient pointed to a very different but much more common condition. Another case also reported by our law journals is where doctors had diagnosed the swelling of a patient's abdomen incorrectly when all the signs pointed towards injuries to a different part of the body. To make matters worse, they had also neglected to carry out very rudimentary and basic tests to ascertain the exact condition of the patient's organs before treating him. And unsurprisingly here, the court found the doctors to be liable. You would be surprised to actually hear that the World Health Organization reported that approximately 5% of adults experience diagnostic errors in outpatient settings each year. Even surprising was the fact that over half of these errors had the potential for severe harm. So if you are a doctor who happened to stumble across this mini podcast, if you would like to avoid and minimize diagnostic errors, especially those that may amount to negligence, you should ensure that, basic duties are carried out before reaching a final diagnosis. What I mean by this is to actually give full consideration to your patient's medical history, to ask the patient questions that are relevant, and actually listen to the patient's account of the illness. And in doubt of the particular diagnosis, it's always good practice for the patient to be referred to a specialist. On the other hand, if you are a patient and if you find yourself frustrated with a diagnosis, do yourself a favor. Get a second opinion. And if you have reasons to believe that your doctor was negligent in his diagnosis, the best thing for you to do before commencing a lawsuit and whatnot is to approach a lawyer who is able to give you a very honest and frank opinion on whether you have a case. There's nothing worse than spending money, time, and resources on something which you later find out you never had. So with that, I'm Shauna Ann Thomas, and I hope you have a good week.